Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, and thank you for joining us today. There's been a lot written, a lot of social posts and blogs about recent announcements, like the draft of Revision 3 of NIST 800-171, but a little has put this into context or explained what this means to you as a DIB organization, and that's what we intend to address today. Today's discussion on how the 800-171 R3 release affects you has been supported and promoted by a number of companies committed to the security of the DIB. And those companies include NeoSystems, Prevail, DTC Global, Redspin, Shellman, FutureFeed, A-Line, Summit 7, Microsoft, AWS, Peak InfoSec, Intech Solutions, Boston Government Solutions, Wise Technical Innovations, CG Silvers, KTL Solutions, CysArk, KLC Consulting, Credo Cyber Consulting, Witham, PTC, CMMC, Audit Pros, and Warren Everett. There is a question panel in your council. We will not be taking questions during the session, but we'll summarize the questions we receive and distribute responses to those attending in an email. So let's get started. The Washington Technology publication put forth an article on the 31st of May that clearly stated why all companies in the defense industrial base should be ready to comply before the eventual release of CMMC, and that despite the pending revisions to the core NIST 800-171 guidance, no company can wait to comply. Now, yes, revisions have been announced for the guidelines at the heart of CMMC. Again, specifically the announcement of Revision 3 of NIST 800-171. But much needs to occur before those changes can be implemented, and that process is going to take time. Jacob Horn, who's the chief cybersecurity evangelist at Summit 7 in the Washington Technology article, said that companies should continue to work on their compliance with the current version of the standard, and that it would be a mistake for companies to wait for NIST to finalize the third version of 800-171. Companies that pause their compliance efforts with the current 800-171, according to Horn, will be months and potentially even a year behind. There have been articles, blogs, and web events analyzing the differences between the current Rev 2 and Rev 3, and it's clear that virtually everything required in Rev 2 will be required in Rev 3. Complying with Rev 2 is not only an existing requirement, it's a foundation for complying with Rev 3 when it eventually takes effect. So expect compliance with 800-171 Rev 2 to impact your business long before Rev 3 is phased in. So today, rather than talking about what Rev 3 is, we want to talk about what this and other announcements mean to you and to your business. So with me today are two of the most knowledgeable individuals on this topic. First, Katie Arrington. Katie is the former Chief of Information Security for Acquisition with the Department of Defense and is presently the CEO of LD Innovations, LLC, a boutique consultancy committed to the security and the resilience of the DIB. And James Goepel, an attorney, co-founder of the CMMC Information Institute, founding director and former board treasurer of the CMMC accreditation body, and currently director of education and content at FutureFeed. So Jim, let me start with you. Bob Metzger, an attorney who heads the Washington, D.C. office of Rogers Joseph O'Donnell, pointed out earlier this month that the FedRAMP PMO had just released the FedRAMP Revision 5 baselines and its transition guidance. The intent is to move those seeking FedRAMP authorization from Revision 4 to Revision 5 of the NIST 853 controls. Bob noted that NIST released Revision 5 on September 23rd, 2020, and it took FedRAMP 32 months to release new baselines and provide transition guidance, and the transition is not immediate, yet nor could it be. Bob suggests the implementation of 800-171 Revision 3 will follow a similar course, and that we should expect a prudent, studied approach over time, not a precipitous or instantaneous obligation to switch to 800-171 Revision 3. There have been many others that have speculated on how and when 800-171 Rev 3 may be implemented, but a minimum, what are the steps required before 800-171 Rev 3 can be implemented? And Jim, what is a realistic timeline?
So I think to answer your last question first, the realistic timeline is probably not until 2025 before we start to really see the Rev 3 being effective. Doesn't mean CMMC won't be effective, doesn't mean that 800.171 isn't something that you should be paying attention to now. Rev 2 is actually in many contracts. It's the foundation for how non-federal agencies are supposed to be protecting CUI that's in their environment. So you need to be paying attention to it, but it's realistically, there's a bunch of hoops that need to be jumped through. NIST still has to finalize both the 800.171 and 171 alpha, the assessment guide. They said that they expect to do that. The final version should be sometime in Q1 of 2024. So we're already 6+ months from now. And then you have the AB has to, assuming DoD is prudent in the way that they write the new CMMC regulations so that they can adapt and adopt this without having to go through all the regulatory stuff that they're going through again. If they're smart about the way they do it, and they can do it pretty quickly, you still have to go through the whole process of updating the CMMC assessment guide. You still have to go through all the other documentation that they have to do. Then you have the training materials that have to happen for the CMMC ecosystem and the AB. So this is not a quick process by any stretch of the imagination. As a realistic timeline, I don't think training on this stuff will be on CMMC based on 800.171 Rev 3. I don't think that could be available until at least this time next year. And then you have to have time for all those assessors to actually get out there, get comfortable with it. Again, by the time you're done, I think the earliest that this is likely to be enforceable is Q1 of 2025. So but that doesn't, Stuart, to your point right off the bat, doesn't mean you shouldn't get started. It absolutely, everything that's in 800.171 Rev 2 that I've seen is in 171 Rev 3. I haven't read every change yet, but everything that I've seen is there. Smart thing to do is read Rev 2 and start building your program. Look at what's in Rev 3 as guidance for how to build your Rev 2 program. There are some places where you can make some decisions in Rev 2 that wouldn't cut the mustard when it comes to Rev 3. So just use it as guidance.
Right. And I think the point is the DoD, through this announcement, hasn't put the requirements in DFARS 250, 204, 7012 on hold. And organizations are, it's not that they're expected, they've been required to comply with those requirements, which include 800.171 R2, and we know that the DoD will be enforcing those requirements. So Katie, let me move on. I mean, the original rule change to 48 CFR that established cybersecurity maturity model certification requirements with the DFARS 252, 204, 7021, in which enabled contracting officers to include those requirements in RFIs, RFPs, and contract awards, was published on September 30th, 2020. It doesn't seem like that long ago. But it was published as an interim rule, which made the change effective 60 days later on November 30th. There's confusion regarding the status and the timeline of the current CMMC rulemaking process and whether it'll be released as an interim rule, which could become effective in 60 days, or released as an in-process rule, which requires adjudication of public comments before the rule can be released. National security was the justification for an interim rule designation 3 years ago. Is national security any less of an issue, especially when we hear about escalation and state-sponsored attacks like the Chinese-sponsored Volt Typhoon Group's successful efforts to assess our critical maritime infrastructure recently? Could the new rule be issued as an interim rule? And if so, how early could it go into effect?
So, Stuart, I pray every single day that they put it as an interim rule. Right now, the placeholder was a proposed rule, but that doesn't mean that OMB won't change their mind, because it is a matter of national interest and national security. A couple of the things that everybody, I think, should know is, first and foremost, the CIO, the DoD CIO, is the one who decides what standard is to be used for the defense industrial base. So it's up to the CIO, ultimately, when Rev 3 of the 171 is finalized, if they actually decide to implement it inside the DoD. So that's not a given, right? That is up to the CIO at the time. I do believe, and I think that the way that the rule would be written right now, Jim, you said it, and Stuart, I 100%, is that the reason that they went back and adjusted the 32 CFR was so that they wouldn't have to go back and change the CMMC rule every time there was a new NIST revision. It's just grandfathering in what was. So if you were certified on Rev 2, you're good for 3 years in that capability. And if they decide to bring in Rev 3, well, then they'll start the process probably a year after the finalization of starting the, the documentation and the guides. But nobody should be taking their foot off the pedal to get certified. I strongly suggest to companies, we've recently seen DHS roll out cybersecurity for critical infrastructure. And one of the things I will foot stomp is, please, if you're in and you're a prime and you're on this call, if you're a sub and you want to gain more business, reach out to a certified C3PAO from the Cyber AB and get a NIST 171 Rev 2 verification. Trust but verify. Do your self-assessment, see where you are, submit your SPRS score, but do get you can do it right now. You can call and have them come. If you can reach out to your MEP in your state, Manufacturer Extension Partnership or APEX, there are resources to help you get that NIST verification, but why wait? That, when the rule goes into effect, everybody is going to be, I don't want to say trampling over each other, but they're going to be trampling over each other to get certified. Why would you put it off? It's only going to get more stringent. Get your company ready, be compliant to which you should have already been. And when and if they adopt Rev 3, you'll be at a much better position to move forward. But don't wait. There's no point in waiting right now.
Yeah. And won't that NIST validation make a company more attractive to a prime?
Absolutely. And most of the primes are moving to illumination tools. So they are very keen on what your weaknesses are, where your vulnerabilities, and if cyber is your vulnerability, and remember, a lot of them are using capabilities like security scorecard out there today to rate you. If you're able to give them a NIST verification and say, listen, out of the 110 controls, I'm meeting 109 of them, I have my POAM, or I'm meeting 90 of them, here's my POAM, you're in a much more desirable position, because the risk that the prime takes in sending down CUI, I would require it. I don't know why cores don't in the primes, and that's been what I'm out doing right now, trying to get them to take the lead share.
Right. And I would be willing to bet that those NIST validations come out a little bit lower than the SPRS scores that people have reported.
Yeah, you think? It's always the case, but it's, please, and I know every time we get on one of these webinars, we talk about it, and then people are reluctant to do it. These standards aren't going to change, folks. They're only going to get more intense. And if your business wants to remain in business, the Verizon report was released yesterday, I believe, where there has been a 94% increase on the financial crimes in cyber. So the adversary is more interested in putting ransomware and putting you out of business than anything. So get on it. What are you waiting for?
Yeah. And I think, enforcement is going to become, it's certainly going to increase. Let me ask Jim a little bit about that. I mean, the DoD sees security and resilience of the supply chain, as a national security imperative. As we noted, CMMC is not a new set of requirements. In fact, it's not requirements at all. It's a framework established by the DoD to assess contractor implementation of existing cyber requirements to protect CUI in accordance with the existing federal and DoD standards. And once it's enacted, DoD contractors, we know, are going to need to achieve certification under the program. Yeah, but the DoD isn't waiting to enforce the DFARS and NIST 800-171. What are the other mechanisms DoD is employing and likely to employ to enforce compliance? And what are the consequences to DoD contractors?
So DoD has this group called DCMA, the Defense Contract Management Agency. DCMA has another group within it called DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center. DIBCAC has two initiatives that are going on right now. One for the more the large primes and those that are handling the really sensitive CUI, they are going out and conducting very thorough investigations and assessments of their environments, making sure that they're meeting all of the 800-171 requirements, and being, again, very thorough. They also, though, and that process takes time. It takes a lot of people to do that. So it's a resource intensive thing. They aren't doing that many of them, but what they have started doing are their 5-day audits. They call you on a Monday, and by Friday, you must have a copy of your system security plan. You have to have all of the evidence ready, and you package all of that up and give that to them all within a week. If you stop and think, if you've ever been involved in an audit before, a week is not a lot of time to collect your evidence unless you have a good mature program that's already generating all the right evidence and you've got all your ducks in a row. So the smart thing to do is get your ducks in a row before DIBCAC calls, because when they do, again, you've got that 1 week. What they're finding is that DIBCAC is reviewing the SPRS scores. They're reviewing what you've told DoD you are doing, and then comparing that against what is in your system security plan. And they're looking at the delta, the scores that when DIBCAC does it, to Katie's point a minute ago, when DIBCAC comes and knocks on your door, they see a significant decrease in overall scores. There are lots of places where companies are taking a rosier than should be viewed of their cybersecurity programs. What could they do? Right now, DIBCAC is being nice. They are pointing out that you are overestimating your abilities, and not doing a whole heck of a lot more today. But that doesn't mean that they can't do things in the future. In fact, DoD issued a memo just about 6 months ago to contracting officers, reminding them that every time a government contractor submits a proposal or submits something for payment, they are making claims to the government. And a false claim, meaning that you are not in alignment with all of your cybersecurity regulations, is subject to the False Claims Act, and you can be debarred. You can have your contract terminated. You can be prohibited from participating or not renewing your contract. You can also be hit with what are called False Claims Act claims, either by DoD itself, where they go to the DOJ and say, you've made promises to us and you've basically been in breach of contract, and so you owe us damages, and those damages can go up to 3 times the value of the contract. Or if you have a whistleblower inside your organization who knows that you have not been telling the entire truth to the government, guess what? They can also file what's called a qui tam action, and they can be the one who initiates that litigation against you for 3 times, and they get to keep about 1/3 of the recovery. So there's a lot of motivations for people inside of organizations to start ratting out their bosses and their companies. But it's a smart way to do business from the government's perspective, because it provides a lot of incentives to get your ducks in a row.
Right. And I think there was a ruling by the Supreme Court earlier this week, specifically with respect to adjudication of issues under the False Claims Act, and that assertion that you thought you were doing things right has to be established before you submitted your information, rather than subsequent saying, yeah, here's why we thought it was right. So I mean, would you expect that we're going to see greater enforcement under the Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative, which allows whistleblowers, and the False Claims Act?
Yeah, the Department of Justice said that they are, I think it was doubling or tripling the amount of resources that they were throwing at cyber fraud cases. And DoD is in one of the best positions to begin identifying companies that have been committing cyber fraud. So yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of that. Right now, we're at the tip of the iceberg.
Okay. So the 1719 clause says you need to submit an SPRS score. The 7020 clause says that that the DIBCAC can come in and audit you. The Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative False Claims Act says you better be telling the truth. And then what about the 7024 clause? How does that fit into all of this?
So that lets the DoD contracting officers begin weighing other information. So Katie's point about the attestation letters, when you submit your proposal to DoD, include in that package, where you talk about how what the bidder's capabilities are, include in that package a copy of the letter that says this is how good we are at cybersecurity, because the contracting officers actually have the flexibility, not only from the 7024 clause, but Katie had pointed out there's actually a new clause in there too. Katie, I'm going to steal your thunder, but it's the 252, 239, 7018. between those two clauses, the contracting officers have a lot of flexibility where they can actually start using that attestation letter as a means of saying, oh, this company is much better. The other companies aren't ready to handle cyber. And so we're going to start weeding them out.
Yeah. Great.
And to Jim's point on that, and I think that clause is really important, right? Now, granted, it's about IT and providing IT services, but they clearly state in that new rule, they do not need to tell how they're going to evaluate the criteria that is submitted in the RFP. And if it's for national security, there is a no protest clause where you cannot protest. So if you're not putting your best foot forward in these places and instances, you may not get the opportunity to come back and do a mother may I, or please forgive me. That along with what the DoD also released this past week was the framework for supply chain risk management. And one of the 6 LOEs on that is cybersecurity. And you have to submit in, and you're seeing that contract language flowing down now. You need to have a supply chain risk management program. What does it mean? And how are you mitigating the risks? And cyber being the top one, what are you doing? So, I mean, the DoD has definitely got all their ducks moving in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Katie, many have said, that in looking at CMMC and NIST 800-171, that they're a good start, but they don't address, every known threat vector like advanced persistent threats. And, we also know the threat landscape is continually evolving, that our adversaries continue to get more sophisticated. Shouldn't we expect regulations to similarly evolve? I mean, do you see R3 as part of that evolution? And what other changes do you envisage in the future to fortify the security and the resilience of the DIB?
So one of the things I've been spending a lot of time actually doing is up on the Hill, talking to the legislators about how we approve cyber regulations and things like the NIST. Time is relevant, right? So by the time Rev 3 gets approved, it'll be outdated. So I have been working with the legislators to see how we can, produce laws to ensure that when there's a cyber need, it goes to the top of the stack. A very quick review process, but by the time we actually get to implementing it, it's outdated, OBE, and the adversary has already, moved on and gone to the next track. I mean, we're seeing that. I was really shocked and amazed in that Verizon report to see the upswing of DDoS attacks over the past 2 years, where, that was something that we really thought with all the capabilities we've been bringing on board that we could thwart, and we've had a significant rise. So how do you write a requirement? How do you get a NIST standard in place when that's happening in real time? So that's another area of focus that we need to say, is it needed and necessary to have all of this public comment period on these things that are so pertinent to national security? I would hate to be the one to say, we're going to wait and do this 24-month process. And as you can see with the CMMC, when we started this in 2019 and here we are in 2023, what has the adversary gained in all this time? So I think that's my big focus for everyone, is how do we fix the current laws so that we can escalate and accelerate acceptance of new NIST standards and the resources to support industry to implement those at the time of relevance. I mean, that's the big thing, relevance.
Very good. So I think if there's, one takeaway from the discussion, it is that DIB companies, can't take their foot off the gas when it comes to compliance with the existing DFARS requirements, and specifically with the current Rev 2 of NIST 800-171. You will be held accountable for meeting those requirements long before the additional requirements of Rev 3 go into effect. So if your organization is in the process of complying with requirements in NIST 800-171 Rev 2, don't stop. Rev 3's changes generally introduce refinements of the requirements in Rev 2. And, the efforts you're putting in now, they won't be wasted with respect to Rev 3, but they certainly won't be wasted with respect to the security of the information with which you're entrusted and the security of the information that you have invested in for your business. Again, don't lose sight of the fact that this is, more than just compliance. It's about protecting the sensitive information with which you've been entrusted, protecting it from our adversaries. It's about our national security and the safety and the efficacy and the lethality of our warfighters. Jim, let me ask for one brief last word from you.
Honestly, I think you summed it up perfectly, Stuart. It's really just if you haven't gotten started, get started. If you are on the path, don't take your foot off the accelerator. Really try to get the stuff done. It may be another year and a half, 2 years at least. And in the interim, everything that you are doing is going to benefit your organization, whether you're a private corporate entity or whether you're a public entity. Getting cybersecurity in place now, Katie has made the point many times, and I completely agree. Like, our adversaries are not going to take it easy on us while we wait to get this stuff done.
I think I remember in a talk Katie recently gave, you said that there is something like 50 Chinese hackers for every one FBI agent that we have in the United States.
It's actually for every member of US Cybercom and the IRS. So think about that. Every member of US Cybercom and the IRS, they have 50 cyber operatives in China.
Wow, so that's pretty frightening. So Katie, you always seem to get the last word anyway, so let me end with you and some last words to share with our audience today.
So first and foremost, folks, I saw a couple of questions, when is the DoD going to implement the CMMC? Well, the CMMC, let's remind everybody, is just the auditing of the NIST 171. It's plain and simple. It's a third-party audit. So they've already started, folks. So if you're asking that question, you're already out of the game. We have got to, and I cannot, the companies, the primes, mergers and acquisition, even banking is looking at illumination risk scoring. If you are not actively participating in having your NIST 171 implemented in your company, it does show up on those risk scores. They are seeing it, and they are not going to choose to use you because the risk is too high. So get involved. Take it to your C-suite, take it to your senior leadership. You have to be implementing the NIST 171 if you are getting CUI already. That was in 2025. But the longer that you wait, as these financial hits come, as ransomware drives, DDoS attack, it's $5,400 a minute in business disruption is what the average cost is. $5,400 a minute. If business disruption, if you don't have access to the internet or your network. Can you afford that? Is the investment to risk that worth the investment in yourself on getting NIST certified?
Oh, great. Well, this has been a great conversation, and we scheduled it for a half an hour, and I think we're just at about a half an hour. Jim and Katie, I want to thank you both for your time today. More important, I want to thank you for your commitment and for both of your tireless efforts in really furthering this incredibly important mission. And thank you to all for joining us today.
Stuart, thank you for having me. Jim, you guys are amazing. And for everybody listening out there, last words from Katie Arrington is remember, guys, one team, one fight.
Absolutely. Thank you all.